The rain had already committed to the night. Not a shower but a campaign, beating a steady grammar onto the windshield while the wipers translated as best they could. The city looked like it had been erased and drawn again with a wet finger. In that borrowed privacy, Maya's hand found mine on the gearshift. A soft pressure that felt like the final click of a door we'd been pretending was still open. Lena was 200 miles away, a hotel lamp burning for a nephew who couldn't keep his fever. She had texted a photo, tiny fist, toy car, followed by a heart that I answered with 2. As if quantity could stand in for sincerity. We were parked outside her building because pretending to drop her off had become the habit that made the rest thinkable. She laughed at something small, my jacket dripping onto my knee, and the laugh wasn't loud. But it contained a decision. We'd been here before, at the edge of a cliff so ordinary it looked like sidewalk. This time, instead of naming the view and walking away, we leaned. Her apartment carried the smell it always did. Citrus and laundry, a domestic innocence that should have closed the door on us and didn't. The windows hummed with rain. The floor creaked in the one spot that has always betrayed late arrivals. She took my coat and didn't go find a hanger. She let it pool on the chair like a permission. When her mouth met mine there was no choreography, just a long delayed recognition. The way a word you can't recall suddenly sits down and acts like it was there all along. Desire wasn't a gust. It was weather that had been building for years and finally had the pressure it needed. It would be cleaner to pretend we were strangers to ourselves. We weren't. The body remembers what the mind files away under decent. I knew the scar near her collarbone from summers where tank tops and barbecues made everyone casual about skin. She knew my habit of apologizing between jokes because my father taught me any victory should be modest. We had the worst kind of intimacy, the kind that believes it can manage consequences as well as it manages kisses. She took my face in both hands for a second. A pause that looked like mercy and was really inventory. Are you sure? Am I sure? Is this the moment we climb out of the lives we made or just the moment we tear a pocket and tell ourselves we can mend it later? I thought of Lena then. With the stubborn tenderness I've always reserved for her. The first apartment that smelled like burnt toast and shampoo. The year we learned how to argue without moving out of frame. The New Year's Eve we spent at my mother's because buses weren't running and we didn't need confetti to feel like the new thing had arrived. Those thoughts didn't stop me. They showed up like witnesses in the back row and kept their coats on. After, the room felt both larger and strangely arranged, as if the furniture had shifted an inch while we weren't looking. We did the practical things people who have just been impractical do. Lights lowered, the polite choreography of normal. She made a joke about the rain applauding us and then grimaced at herself. And we both laughed too quickly, as if speed could make the sound harmless. I told her I should go. She said of course, but stood close enough that of course seemed negotiable. On the stairs, our bodies remembered gravity. On the sidewalk, the storm made us run. My car beeped in relief. We tumbled in, damp around the edges, the cabin fogging instantly with our heat. She dug in her bag for her keys and a small silver compass pendant slid free. Catching the streetlight like luck does when it wants to be mistaken for skill. She wore that necklace like armor on uncertain days. A joke about finding north when north keeps moving. She lifted it, smiled, let it fall back into the dark fabric of her coat. If there was an omen in that tiny circle, we left it there on purpose. I drove her around the block because leaving immediately felt like an admission. We talked about nothing. The bakery that changed hands. The barista who spells names like challenges. The movie none of us will see but all of us will pretend to dislike. When we stopped again in front of her building, she touched my wrist, a brief, disciplined touch that said we are still the people who remember Lena's first promotion cake and my mother's hospital jokes and the time the three of us drove to the coast and argued whether the ocean counts as a place or a mood. Then she was gone, a dark shape moving through a darker lobby. And I was a man alone with a steering wheel and a smell that I was going to have to explain to myself. The drive home was a sermon I refused to attend. The wipers kept time. The streetlights stitched the road into loops. I told myself the smallest and most dangerous story, that a night can be folded back into the drawer if your hands are careful. I rolled the windows down to let the rain air out our names. I turned the radio low enough that the songs could pretend they were weather. I planned the ordinary penances, clean sheets, a grocery run, an extra hour with the kids doing something that looks like virtue and is. And also isn't. At the market lot, I killed the engine and sat with the sudden, accusatory quiet. The glass fog had drawn a soft oval where my face should be. I wiped it with the back of my hand and reached for my jacket, meaning to grab a reusable bag and a version of myself. That's when the light on the passenger seat found it, the compass pendant. Not against her throat now but coiled like a small, bright question on the dark upholstery. For a second the night held its breath. The rain paused between syllables. My first instinct was the childish one, deny the physics. Maybe it wasn't hers, maybe light lies. Then the chain shifted as the car settled. And the arrow swung once, twice, and came to rest pointing nowhere at all. I didn't touch it, not at first. In the space between seeing and claiming, a dozen clean outcomes sprinted past. Mail it to her with no note. Slide it back into her hand in a crowded room. Pretend I never saw it and let the universe decide whether I deserved discovery. The item's weight in the air recalibrated everything inside the car, the receipts in the console, the crumpled napkin, the breath I was holding like a thief. Finally I lifted it, and it warmed instantly against my palm. As if metal, too, can be complicit. I opened the glove compartment and placed it carefully in the dark among manuals and proof of insurance and a stack of napkins my mother insists a car should always have. When the latch clicked shut, it sounded like a period pretending it wasn't the end of a sentence. I went in and bought basil and bread and peaches that smelled like absolution. I practiced normal with the cashier and drove home under a sky that had decided, for now, to let us be dry. In the rearview, I could see nothing that would betray me, which is another word for saying everything would. It was the smallest gleam, a coin of light on dark fabric. The kind of thing a careful person sees twice. Lena reached for the grocery bag on the passenger seat and her fingers paused. "Ha," she said, the way people narrate a magic trick just before they figure it out. In her palm, the silver compass sat like a discovered thought. She didn't look at me first. She looked at the pendant, thumb tracing the arrow as if testing whether it points to anything at all. "Myers." She lifted her eyes. The question wore an easy sweater, but her gaze was ironed flat. "Must be," I said, too quickly, hearing how the words came pre-shrunk. "We gave her a ride last week." The lie landed soft on the seat between us, then began to stiffen. Back upstairs the apartment behaved, lights warm, knives in their slots, a bowl of peaches radiating virtue on the counter. Lena set the pendant beside the fruit as if adding a new ingredient. Then wiped her hands and smiled the way people smile when something is either completely fine or absolutely not. "You know she loses things," she said lightly. "Maybe she'll text in a panic." "She probably will," I answered, choosing a verb without a future tense. Lunch turned into a conversation made of small bridges to larger subjects. She asked about the presentation I was building. I described it until the bullet points sounded like a lullaby. I asked about her sister's baby. She told me the fever had broken at 3 a.m. and she had cried quietly in the bathroom so she wouldn't wake anyone. We could have stayed there, two conscientious adults swapping weather reports, if not for the small orbit on the counter. The compass caught light again. It became the fourth participant at the table. The questions began friendly. When did we last see her? Did she come up that night or did we just drop her? Was it raining then too? Each one posed with a smile. Each one retrieved with a smile's cousin. But Lena's eyes did not let go. They moved over my face like a scanner. Not to catch me, but to understand the topography of my answers. Lena has never been a prosecutor. She is a scientist by temperament. She lives for repeatable results. I stood to make coffee, grateful for any verb that required turning my back. The machine sang its small song. She picked up the pendant again. It's funny, she said, voice soft. She always fiddles with this when she's nervous. You've noticed? I guess, I said, as if the decade had not taught me the notch where it rests at her throat. We might have survived the room if not for the phone. It buzzed once on the table. A small, apologetic sound, then again, then a third time. Too fast, the tempo of a person who should not be texting but cannot stop their hands. Lena flipped the screen without urgency. The preview offered 3 blue bubbles and a fragment of a sentence that pulled the floor toward the ceiling. She opened the thread. Maya, oh God, I'm sorry, I thought I put it back in your glove compartment after last night. Maya, please don't be mad at him. It was my fault too. Maya, I panicked when you texted. We'll tell you, I'm so sorry. The kitchen did what rooms do when language changes their math. It got taller. The light over the sink sharpened. I could hear the small animal of my pulse in my neck. Lena kept her eyes on the phone a heartbeat too long, as if waiting for the punctuation that would rescue grammar. Then she set it down with care, as people do with hot plates. What is there to tell me? She asked. And the question was not a trap. It was a request for a specimen. I tried to retrieve the word mistake from the drawer where I keep my softer nouns. It would not come. I began, and the syllable had no legs. We kissed, I said first, as if a smaller crime could be scaled up to the size of the truth. Her face didn't move. And then? She asked. And then I went upstairs. I said, no metaphor would volunteer. No rain, no hunger, no lonely. Just stairs and the verb everyone already knew. She nodded once, as if marking the page. Our children, who have a sixth sense for air pressure, wandered in on cue. Leela with a book, Jonah with an announcement about volcanoes that died in his mouth when he saw our faces. Lena did not change her tone. She is not a woman who makes weather into theater. Wash your hands, she said, and then I need you to give me 10 minutes. They obeyed the way kids obey when they realize the adults have entered a language that does not include them. We stood in the kitchen like 2 statues in a museum about consequences. She asked the questions anyone would ask. Did she stay? Did you use our bed? Was it only once? Each answer was a brick falling. I offered no decoration. It seemed obscene to ask for credit for honesty now. As if a confession could be a bouquet. Leela reappeared, eyes wide, the corners of her mouth holding on to childhood like a ledge. Is Auntie Maya coming for dinner? She asked. Because rituals try to save themselves. Not tonight, Lena said, and somehow made the words both shelter and lesson. When the 10 minutes came and went, Lena's face did not collapse into rage. She is not built for spectacle. She is built for decisions. She turned to the sink, turned the water on, turned it off, ritual without function, and then faced me again. You'll go to your mother's, she said, tonight. It was not banishment. It was triage. I opened my mouth to say I'm sorry, but the sentence had already been spent. I said, okay. The syllable felt like finding the last step in the dark with your heel. As I packed a bag, the apartment kept behaving. The clock advanced. The basil I'd bought smelled like faith in small things. At the doorway, Jonah looked at me as if I were an animal a zookeeper had told him not to touch. Leela held her book like a shield she was willing to share. I'll call you at 8, I said, and Lena nodded, the administrative kindness that keeps a family from dissolving in public. On the landing, I paused because it is human to wait for reprieve even after the verdict. None came. I stepped into the stairwell and felt the story narrow. Suddenly, into something sharper than divorce papers. The worst thing might not be the legal end. It might be the after. The slow redistribution of gravity. The way mother tongues choose sides. I thought I knew the direction of the storm. The night corrected me. My mother's living room had the bright, unforgiving light she favors. No lampshades. No mercy. She sat in her usual chair by the window with the newspaper folded into a thin batten across her knee. As if she might need to conduct the day. When she saw me in the doorway with a bag that wasn't luggage so much as a confession. She didn't say my name. She pointed at the rug and said, shoes. and I told him off because obedience is the last fluent language between us. I had rehearsed a version of this scene the whole bus ride over, her listening. The old hand on my wrist. The sigh that carries both disappointment and shelter. Instead, there was an arrangement of silence. She gestured to the couch. I sat. The ticking wall clock found its purpose. My mother breathed the way people do when they have paced themselves for long distances, measurable in, measurable out. Her gaze didn't accuse. It catalogued. The chair made the smallest settling sound when she leaned back. And that was louder than anything I had to say. I hurt her, I began, hating how flimsy the sentence sounded even as it tried to be brave. I slept with Maya. Names land differently under bright light. Maya became a syllable you could break a tooth on. My mother's eyes moved once to the side, toward the photograph of our family on the bookcase, and then returned to me, unchanged. She didn't interrupt. She let me lay out the pieces, the rain, the tea, the wrong door opening, the necklace, the texts, Lena's stillness, the children's careful faces. I found myself using nouns with no adjectives, as if description would be an insult to the facts. When I ran out of sentences, the room felt like a table where I had emptied my pockets. Here are the coins. The lint, the receipt for something I shouldn't have bought. My mother folded the newspaper once more, aligning the edges with a precision she usually saves for dough and hospital forms. She set it on the arm of the chair. I waited for the old line, some variation of "I understand" or "You are still my son," as if it might be a lever to lift the floor back into place. She looked at me, not unkindly, and delivered the simplest sentence she owns. "You are not worthy to be my son." It landed without theatrics. The air in the room did not rush to fill the space around the words. My mouth opened by habit and found no sentence that wouldn't embarrass me. Somewhere outside, a delivery truck shifted gears and the sound came through the window like a reminder that the world goes on even when your lineage hesitates. I felt a precise, almost clinical dislodging inside me, as if a familiar scaffold had been unbolted quietly while I slept. "Not today," she added, after a measured breath. "I am not talking about the baby you were. I am talking about the man who walked here carrying a bag and thinking I would make a softer story for him to sleep in." There was no heat in it, only the arithmetic she trusts. Choices plus consequences equals adults. "I wanted you to understand," I said, and even to my ears the wish sounded childish. A request to be put back into a bed I set on fire. She inclined her head, not a nod but an acknowledgement of a sound in another room. "I understand that Lena is in her kitchen trying to keep the floor from feeling like water to your children," she said. "I understand she will answer 100 practical questions today so they can still believe this is a house." She let the list end there. A mercy and a boundary. She doesn't have to do it alone, I said, and hated how fast the words came. How they tried to pretend I was offering help rather than asking to be absolved by usefulness. My mother's mouth made the closest thing she has to a smile when she is tired of nonsense. "She is not alone," she said. "I am with her." I sat with that. The old architecture groaned and rebalanced. Rooms I thought were mine now rented to someone who deserved them. "You're taking her side," I said, and the sentence was small and stupid and true. For the first time, she answered, not triumphant, simply accurate. I should have sooner in smaller ways. Today I am doing it in the way that matters. She leaned forward then, her elbows on her knees. The way she sat when she taught me to tie my shoes. When she taught me to hold a knife without cutting my thumb. "Love is not the same as protection," she said. "I have loved you like a roof. Today I will love you like a floor. Stand on it, or fall through." The room shifted again, not with drama but with weight. My eyes found, reflexively, the objects that have narrated my whole life. The chipped bowl from our first apartment. The clock my father wound every Sunday. The apron hook that holds nothing now but remembers the shape of purpose. Everything remained itself. I was the variable. She asked the questions Lena hadn't had time to ask. "Do you have money for the month? Are you drinking? Are you going to work or hiding from it? Do you intend to apologize without insisting on being forgiven?" Each landed like a task list more honest than any I had made for myself. I answered as plainly as she had asked. Enough. No, I am going tomorrow. Yes. Good, she said. The word did not lift anything. It labeled a box. You will sleep in the den. In the morning you will leave before the children wake. You will not arrive at their door without permission. You will not ask them to hold your sadness for you. She stood. The movement had no ceremony. And you will not speak badly of Maya in this house. She added, because I will not let cowardice borrow morality's voice. I nodded because speech felt gauche. She handed me a blanket, the heavy one reserved for flu and grief, and for a second her fingers touched my wrist. It wasn't comfort, it was inventory. She was counting what was still warm. At the door to the hallway I turned and searched her face for some quieter reprieve, the crinkle at the eye, the softened jaw. She gave me nothing performative. She looked a long time, as if she were checking whether a piece of furniture would bear weight. Then she dipped her chin once. A fraction of a nod that felt, absurdly, like a verdict I could live under. On the couch in the den, under the blanket that smells faintly of lemon and winter, I stared at the dark until it stopped hiding anything. In the kitchen, I heard her open a drawer. Close it. Breathe. Sit. The house settled around the new arrangement. It hurt in the particular way that truth hurts when it has your face. I had thought the worst part would be losing the marriage. It turned out the deeper break was this: watching my mother move to the other side of the room and stand there. Steady, not to banish me, but to build a wall that protects what I had endangered. For the first time in my life, her love faced away from me, and somehow that is when I finally saw it. From the sidewalk I could see them through the ripple of old glass. My mother holding Lena the way she used to hold me after fevers. Palm moving in slow circles between the shoulder blades like she was ironing panic flat. The porch light made a warm coin of the space around them. Yellow as butter, while the rest of the evening kept its distance. I stood just outside the pool of light, rain wet and unnecessary, watching two women who had memorized the choreography of consolation without me. The screen door breathed open, breathed closed, as if the house itself needed to regulate what came in. My mother's mouth moved against Lena's hair, not so much whispering as measuring breath. She has always believed in oxygen as first aid. When she noticed me, a shape beyond the frame, she didn't startle. She kept one arm around Lena and lifted her chin a fraction in my direction. The smallest, most fluent of our old signals, go. It was not anger, it was traffic control. I nodded like a stranger who has wandered into a private scene and knows enough to leave the picture intact. Word traveled across the family like weather moving over roofs. Cousins stopped answering with gifts and switched to nothing. The aunt who never forgets birthdays sent a single dot, then deleted even that much. My phone lit up with a group thread that didn't include me. Support for Lena, a lattice of love and logistics, rides, soups, spare beds, names of lawyers delivered in the neutral tone of a recommendation for a plumber. On my side, the men adjusted their voices. At the barber shop, the barber asked, same as usual, and did not meet my eyes in the mirror because mirrors are too honest when the subject is a person who has used up his grace. An old friend texted a link to a podcast about accountability as if throwing a rope down a well. I stared at the blue bubble without touching it, feeling the ghost click of a reply that would be too tidy to be true. The children learned a new grammar of boundaries with a seriousness adults like to claim as their own. Leela sent a note, dictated to Lena and carefully typed, I am not ready to see you in person. I will read with you on the phone for 10 minutes. Jonah declined with art, a volcano drawn in thick red marker. A stick figure near the lava with a speech bubble that said, oops, and a second figure farther away holding another's hand, saying, we go this way. Lena captioned it simply, he wanted you to see. I wrote back, I see. I will follow the arrow. Then I put the phone face down because there is a point at which even right-sized words make a room wobble. On the street, neighbors performed the etiquette of knowing. The woman with the terrier said how are you with a cadence that meant I heard and that's all I'm going to say. And I answered I'm all right with the cadence that meant I'm not. But I'm practicing. The guy from the third floor, who believes eye contact is alone, watched his shoes and said, "Tough." And I said, "Yes," as if we were discussing the weather. What surprised me was not the judgment. People are generous. Then tired, then silent, but the way the roots shifted under my feet. The Sunday lattice of obligations and delights that had tied my life to kitchens and living rooms began to redraw itself without my weight. I visited my mother's building one evening because habit is stronger than instruction, and stopped on the landing when I heard voices in our kitchen. Leo, my younger cousin with the easy grin and the new seriousness that comes to men who've learned the usefulness of their hands, was there. He sat in my chair and reached the salt without being told. Passed the bread at the right moment. Laughed in the right register so my mother's mouth could relax into its rare shape. From the hallway, the scene felt like a magic trick. Nothing vanished. And yet I wasn't there. The room held. The bowl got placed where it needed to be without consulting me. I understood, with the slow sting that follows anesthesia, that I had not been exiled from love. I had been replaced in function. Houses have jobs, and if you refuse yours long enough, the job migrates. Lena and my mother spoke with the economy of people working a double shift. They divided tasks without ceremony, parented in complementary keys. I heard my mother say, "I will take them Thursday," and Lena answer, "I'll send the list." And I recognized the domestic music I used to think was composed for me. I stayed on the landing and did not knock. Because if love is a house, then decency is staying off the porch when you do not own a key. At night in the rented room, the quiet assembled its tools. The bottle waited on the wobbly table like an old friend with bad ideas. Beside it, a framed photo from a beach day before the fault line split the yard, Lena in sunglasses. Leela with sand knotted into her hair. Jonah mid-leap, the blur that is his native shape. My mother in the background arranging towels as if textiles could hold the shoreline in place. If you tilt the photo just so you can catch, in the lenses, the faint oval of Maya holding the camera, I tilted it the other way. Even photographs deserve a better angle. There is a particular fatigue that arrives when your name stops being a key and becomes a caution. I felt it most in the small refusals of the day. The coffee I did not buy at the shop where we used to debrief Saturdays. The game night text I ignored because the jokes would land on the table and scatter like dry pasta. The way I turned my face from a store window where a dress I'd once imagined on Lena now looked like it would prefer the shoulders of a woman who had not learned my exact weight. I called my mother to ask if she needed anything carried. She asked for flour and lemons and did not invite me in when I delivered them. She took the bag and said, "Thank you," in the tone you reserve for a neighbor doing you a favor. It was not cruelty, it was the new math. I began to think of the family tree not as a metaphor but as a living thing that had made a prudent cut. Somewhere above the ground line. A clean pruning, the kind that looks brutal in winter and necessary in spring. You stand there with your hand on the stump and realize the tree is not punishing you, it is trying to survive. The pain is immediate and argues with the mind. The mind loses, the body learns. The night I felt the cut most was windier than the others. The building moaned around its old screws. I set the bottle in the middle of the table because centerpieces make a room pretend to have purpose. I tried not to drink and then did. The whiskey was too sweet. As if sugar could camouflage the fact that barley and water, left to themselves, will decide to become something stronger than either meant. I placed the glass beside the photograph and watched the two of them stage a still life of the life I had made for myself. One object that accelerates forgetting and one that refuses to forget. I slept poorly and woke with decisions hangover, not a headache. Exactly, more a loose feeling in the joints of the day. Like a shelf you know will hold but prefer not to load yet. I turned the photo toward the wall. I set the glass in the sink and let the water run until the last amber diluted into nothing. The room did not congratulate me. The room, like a stern teacher, pointed to the board where the lesson was written already. Bottom is not a landing. It is a floor you learn to stand on 1 inch at a time. Before switching off the lamp, I arranged the 3 items on the table into a sentence only I would read, the bottle scented. The photo angled back toward me. The car key placed atop the picture frame where the compass chain would have been if the world were generous to the undeserving. The light caught the scratched metal and made a brief, ugly star. I sat a while, long enough for the star to fade, then climbed into a bed that bows and listened to the room count my mistakes back to me in the hum of the fridge. When sleep finally came, it arrived like a truce, conditional and unsigned. The last thing I saw was the stubborn composition of that table, cheap liquor. Old joy, holding still as if it had all the time it needed to teach me what being cut off truly means. The year did not redeem me. It trained me. I marked its shape with small obedience, shoes by the door, alarms before the sun, a body nudged from sleep into movement. Running came first, awkward and loud, joints arguing with lungs until repetition negotiated a truce. I learned the city's hour before bakery trays slid into glass cases and before buses remembered their routes. I learned to count breaths when thoughts tried to auction themselves off to regret. The bottle on the table became a thing to carry to the trash instead of a sermon. On a September morning that had no special weather, I poured a finger of whiskey and watched it take the light without giving any back. I tipped it into the sink and didn't replace the bottle. No one congratulated me. The quiet, for once, felt like company instead of judgment. Work returned in partial sentences. A former client asked for help fixing a deck that had lost its verbs. I returned it tidier, sharper, more honest than I had been forced to be with myself. That job introduced another. By winter, I had a chair at a modest office with a window large enough to watch the sky make decisions and small enough to keep me useful. My calendar learned restraint. Blocks for labor, blocks for sweat, blocks for the unglamorous maintenance of a life you can respect at arm's length. I ate food I cooked. I washed the pan. I slept like a person who owed the morning something. With the kids, I practiced presence without theater. Leela and I made a pact to read the same book and trade underlined sentences on Sundays by text. A ritual that borrowed intimacy without claiming rights. Jonah sent me videos of skateboard progress, a fall, a laugh, a triumph with the camera pointed at his grin instead of the trick. I replied with the grammar of the new us, brief, precise, promising nothing I could not deliver. When I had them for hours, I let time be ordinary. We stood in checkout lines. We folded towels. We counted the crows on the fence and decided whether 3 is luckier than 4. When they went home, I didn't sit with my emptiness like a pet. I let it be a room I passed through on the way to bed. One evening in early summer, my mother's message arrived without embroidery, "Come at 7." I read it twice to make sure I hadn't invented gentleness into the pixels. At 6:57 I sat on her stoop because I no longer believe in arriving early to mercy. At 7 exactly, she opened the door. The hallway smelled the same as always. Lemon, starch, a memory of soup. She stepped aside. I walked in without touching the wall, the way boys do to prove the house still knows their shoulders. She was at the sink. Sleeves rolled, wrists thin and competent. She glanced at me, a mechanic assessing whether a familiar machine will start. No smile, a small nod, the kind issued by people who have reconsidered their faith and decided to let it stand with revisions. She placed a cup on the counter and filled it with hot water. Slid lemon toward me with the knife already pointed away. There were 2 other cups waiting. She did not narrate them. "Are you sleeping?" she asked. Not with worry but with inventory. "Mostly," I said. "Better. Work. Steady. Drink." No. The word felt level. It didn't need a drum roll. We stood in the polite silence of a kitchen that has hosted both sentences and storms. She moved like a person who has seen too much to be impressed by change but is willing to believe in it when it shows up on time. I told her I wasn't here to be forgiven. I said I wanted to be seen doing the next right thing and the next. She did not compliment the sentiment. Compliments are for birthdays. She glanced at my shoes. At the laces properly tucked. At my hands that had stopped fidgeting. Her gaze climbed back to my face. Not tender, not cold, measured. A key turned in the lock. The children's voices entered the apartment like a familiar song retrieved from a dusty radio. Jonah reached me first and paused. Our small checkpoint. Then leaned in. Leela followed, her hello careful and exact. A bridge lowered just enough to allow a crossing. Lena stood in the doorway behind them. Shoulders set, face open without invitation. We greeted each other in our reduced language, 2 syllables. Nothing wasted. 10 minutes, Lena said gently, and the word held more than time. Terms. Temperature. Trust. We spent them drinking tea and negotiating the science fair in tones usually reserved for treaty talks. Leela read a line she liked: "Forgiveness is a door with no handle on the outside." My mother grunted approval. Jonah asked if parsley can grow roots in a glass of water. My mother said, "Most things can, if you give them enough quiet." She looked at me for half a second when she said it and then looked away on purpose. When they left, the apartment exhaled. My mother washed 2 cups and set them upside down with the geometry she requires of all objects. I wiped a dry ring from the table and felt absurdly proud of the small exactness. She watched the glass drain and then, without ceremony, said, "You will come on certain Sundays. Not all. You will bring fruit. You will not perform." "I'll bring fruit," I said, and let the sentence stand without extra clauses. The future teased at the edges. Modest as a grocery list. She considered me one more time, as if testing a floorboard for creaks. Then came the nod, no wider than a blink, no thinner than a verdict. On the walk home, the city did not applaud. The bakery had already closed. The gym's windows reflected nothing but fluorescent honesty. In my room I boiled water, sliced an apple, stretched until the day's labor let go of my shoulders. I taped a new list to the wall: run, work, call if invited, read, bring fruit. The calendar did not promise anything. It offered squares. I lay down and thought of the first year as a language I had finally learned to conjugate. I hurt. I repair. I continue. Under her eyes, clear, stern, exacting, I understood that love had not put a roof over me. It had put ground under my feet and demanded I stand. I closed my eyes and said, not for drama but because it fit my mouth now, I lost my family for a minute of weakness. But it was my mother's stern gaze that taught me love is not sheltering, it is requiring me to become worthy.